As you know by now, there is no E3 this year. Unfortunately, instead we have this Summer of Gaming, which is basically just a bunch of Nintendo Directs. Which I'm sure to some of you sounds like a huge improvement over the usual trash fires that these live presentations often turn out to be, but I for one love the cringe. I think that's the best part of E3, watching a bunch of boomers who don't understand the first thing about the gaming audience try to look cool and failing spectacularly. Adding on to this, there's been huge technical malfunctions, and more recently, and possibly the most cancerous of all, political pandering, which is what made last year so insufferable. Now it's just a bunch of pre-recorded presentations with trailers, most of which for games I will never play. Even as a reviewer, they just don't interest me and probably don't interest the majority of people either. So instead of doing a big video trying to sum up a bunch of fucking trailers, we might as well just talk about Starfield, since that's probably the most hyped thing, at least coming out in the next 12 months, or at least I hope the next 12 months. I fucking called it. I knew it wouldn't come out this year. I said it in some other video, I don't remember which one. But it's really looking like Elden Ring's not going to have any competition for Game of the Year, which sucks because I had one of the most negative reviews of it. Look, I still think it's a good game. It doesn't make my top 3 From Software games, but still definitely something worth your time. And so, getting to Starfield, just based on the footage we've now been shown, there's plenty of reasons to have doubts about this game if you're hyping yourself up, again, after so many other disappointments. I've said this before, but Fallout 4 was my personal second biggest gaming disappointment of all time, only surpassed by Cyberpunk. So you better believe my expectations for Bethesda are pretty fucking low at this point. But that's not going to stop the normie casual audience from eating this shit up when already there's so many warning signs in just this small gameplay demonstration. Now, I'm not going to be one of those cancerous channels that breaks down trailer footage frame by frame with fucking red arrows and circles on everything. No, I'm just going to take each segment, give my criticisms or commentary, and then we'll move on to the next. So the showcase begins showcasing what we already knew, that this is a space exploration game, essentially. And the year is 2330, and we see our main character land on the moon Crete. He steps outside of his spaceship with a robot in front of him, and already, I gotta say, this looks eerily similar to No Man's Sky. Obviously, much more handcrafted and much better graphics as well. But there's something about barren planet landscapes that will always remind me of that game and how much of a disappointment it was to pretty much everybody. Now, of course, they've completely revamped it by now, but most people who tried it probably never tried it again after that disastrous launch. That being said, it was incredibly successful, and I wouldn't doubt for a second that No Man's Sky's initial success was the inspiration for this game. And that becomes increasingly more apparent as early on in this gameplay, we see there's mining for minerals in this game. Oh boy, that sure looks like fun. I can't wait to be wasting so much fucking time for this. Even if there's very little actual similarity to No Man's Sky in the final game, at best, we can expect it to be like Fallout 4, where you're scavenging around for goddamn aluminum cans and tape and glue. I hated that so fucking much, guys, especially since I'm the type of guy who wants to min-max all of his weapon attachments to craft the best gun I possibly can. If these minerals are used to upgrade your ship or your suit or your guns, there will be a rant dedicated just to that in the review, I promise you.
From running research projects with the resources you find, to crafting weapon mods needed to survive.
Fuck! In the next section of the gameplay, we see our first combat encounter, and this gameplay looks eerily similar to Fallout 4. And I'm certainly not the first to make this observation. I've read a few comments stating exactly the same thing. You have brain-dead enemy AI, which I know is every Bethesda game, but you think they would maybe improve the combat in some way, especially since you do it so often. That was one of my biggest complaints with Fallout 4, is that, okay, yes, you made the shooting better, you made using throwables convenient, looting was far, far improved from any previous Bethesda game, but the enemies are still the same brain dead, blind, borderline suicidal guys that we've been shooting since Fallout 3. Enemies with melee weapons will still rush in a straight line towards you as you shoot them in the face. The most revolutionary addition to AI in Fallout 4 was them taking cover. Everything else was still the same shit that you dealt with the same way every single time. And it only gets more noticeable the more you do it. The cracks really start to show, even to the most ignorant and brain-dead and oblivious gamers, if you make them shoot people for like 60 straight hours. And so seeing the exact same combat again from the second most disappointing game I've ever played is not a good sign. Also, I want to point out, and I know this shouldn't be a surprise considering it's Bethesda, but for a fucking gameplay showcase with possibly hundreds of thousands, if not a couple million people watching this, they couldn't get a stable 60 FPS for this vertical slice gameplay demonstration. I mean, really? I guess that means it's real gameplay, at least. Maybe that's preferable to fake gameplay, I don't know. It's just kind of funny, I guess. In the next section of this showcase, our Lord and Savior Todd Howard resists his inner temptation to sell a Skyrim again and tells us a little bit about the game's story, which I will be kind and say sounds interesting. The thing is, Bethesda is notoriously bad at writing main quest lines. Pretty much every single one they've written since Fallout 3 has been incredibly shallow, with a cartoonishly evil faction that has no internal logic or motivation for what they do. They're just the generic bad guy. There's no nuance whatsoever. But maybe this time it'll be different. But to hold back the cynicism for a moment, I will say that the concept of being part of the last group of space explorers is pretty interesting and a nice change of pace from the usual chosen one hero story that we're given. And like I mentioned before, the character models are vastly improved. They finally actually look like people instead of Oblivion where they all had Down syndrome, or Skyrim and Fallout 4 where they looked like melted wax models. Now they do actually look like people. Is it perfect? No, but I'm not really a graphics guy anyway. It's certainly good enough for me. And we're shown a bunch of different environments, presumably on different planets, that look pretty nice. At least what they've shown us here looks good. And some woman is narrating over all of this, talking about artifacts left behind by, obviously, an alien civilization of some kind that is mysteriously missing. And I'm guessing that's what the main plot will be that everyone's just going to ignore. In the third part of the showcase, Todd shows us Starfield's character creation system. And to give Bethesda some credit yet again, this definitely looks like a step up from their last few games. They have character backgrounds which affect starting skills, they brought back traits, which will give you some benefits and some penalties, hopefully significant ones to how your character plays. I'll admit I was never a dude who really went for these. In New Vegas I would always just do Wild Wasteland and Skilled, but I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who enjoy traits from older RPGs, so good on Bethesda for listening to at least one criticism. That being said, the next part raises some serious issues. We get to see the skill trees, and at first glance, it looks eerily similar to Fallout 4's. And Fallout 4's skill tree system is easily one of the worst parts of the game. It allows for absolutely no player choice because higher ranks of skills were locked behind your level. So let's say, for example, you wanted to play a sneak character. Well, too bad, because you gotta be level 10 to get rank 2 of the sneak skill, and then level 20 to get the 3rd rank, and level 30 to get the 4th rank. So no, you can't play a sneak character, because Bethesda said you can't. They literally took out the ability to properly min-max your character in Fallout 4, because they didn't want to fucking balance their game. But upon closer inspection, this skill tree is not, in fact, anything like Fallout 4's. Apparently you still level up and get a skill point with each level up, but to unlock additional ranks of a certain perk tree, you have to fulfill a challenge. Now, a challenge shown here is pretty basic, like kill 250 enemies with ballistic weapons, which is pretty boring. So I'm wondering if functionally this really is much different from how the Elder Scrolls games handles it. And I'm really hoping these perk ranks are significant, because that was yet another complaint I had with Fallout 4, that a lot of the perks were just kind of boring, like 20% more damage with rifles, 40% more damage with handguns, you know, so on and so forth. The more interesting perks were unlock new mods for guns, or new crafting recipes. You get the point. And speaking of crafting, god damn it, they brought back the same fucking weapon mod system for Fallout 4. God, why? Now you gotta run around, fucking mine all these shitty materials across all the planets to unlock a sharpshooter grip for your totally not a P90. This really is just Fallout 4 with a No Man's Sky skin, isn't it? Why, Bethesda? Can't you just fucking make a fun game? Instead of giving me all this busy work and all these materials and shit I gotta waste my time picking up. I already know people are gonna say you could just ignore it because loot drops will have mods already on them, just like Fallout 4. Oh great, another thing like Fallout 4, that's good. No, I have to min-max. I like making the best guns ever. But collecting the materials doesn't have to be boring. Shooting at a wall with a mining laser is fucking boring. That's part of why people hated No Man's Sky. Getting back to the showcase, we're then shown the new Outposts system. That's another thing I fucking hated from Fallout 4. It felt completely tacked on. Luckily, you could just ignore it, but it's looking like this is gonna be a major gameplay mechanic. I'm hoping not. If it's completely optional again, I can let it slide. Fallout 4 had much bigger problems, and likely this game will too. But, to not be so negative, directly after this they did show you being able to build your own spaceship, which is pretty cool, and Todd claims that how you build your ship will actually affect how it controls, which of course leads into the next section where they show you being able to fly your ship. And of course there are space battles as well, so this actually has a lot of potential to be an actually fulfilling alternate gameplay style. I just talked about Ratchet & Clank going commando and how much I like the space battles in that game. So if this actually is fun and is not just like a distraction or a loading screen like it was in No Man's Sky, I would enjoy this quite a bit. Now for the final part of the showcase, this is what worries me the most. Todd Howard says that you can land anywhere on these planets, and there's over 1,000 planets. Now, if you're just an average guy and that doesn't sound crazy to you, try and picture 1,000 of anything in front of you. I don't think you quite understand how impossible it would be to have 1,000 locations feel handcrafted. I guarantee you 80 to 90% of the landscapes in this game will be giant barren wastelands. There's no way that planetary exploration on this scale can be engaging. I'm sorry, that might be a hot take. And for those of you who really do just want a space exploration game where you go and land on barren wastelands with nothing of value on them, why not just play No Man's Sky? I've heard the game's actually pretty good right now. This isn't what I wanted out of a Bethesda game. I don't think any old school Bethesda game fan, or let's be honest, Obsidian fan, if we're talking about New Vegas, wanted a bunch of giant empty landscapes. That's not what we wanted. We wanted RPG mechanics. We wanted characters to talk to, engaging quest lines to remember. Again, I'm going to give you another hot take, but I really think the greatest world Bethesda ever made was Fallout 3's. It was a lot like a theme park where every corner of the map had a unique location and they were all pretty close together. You could walk across the entire map in like 20 minutes. Yeah, some of them didn't make any sense, like the perfectly preserved 50s neighborhood full of cannibals that is just a movie cliche. Or Dukov's place, which is surrounded by super mutants, and somehow he's able to protect 3 housewives, we'll say for the sake of YouTube. But Washington, D.C. being like a huge mega dungeon, and you have all these memorable vaults, you have the city full of death claws, You have a huge minefield with a sniper. There's all sorts of really memorable, cool locations in Fallout 3. Fallout 4 didn't even have a fraction of that, and the map was more than twice as large. And I could say the same for most of Bethesda's other games. Skyrim has a million forgettable caves. And I could keep going on, but the point is, bigger is not better. In fact, in most cases, bigger is worse. We've seen this with the Ubisoft sandboxes, Bethesda sandboxes. Then you have some smaller studios with games like Biomutant, which is one of the worst games THQ's made in a long time, which was inspired by Witcher 3, which in and of itself has a pretty empty world. And so, what do you think's going to happen with 1,000 planets? Look, this is just Bethesda's No Man's Sky, with Fallout 4 shooting, and I can only hope that this will be saved by having better writing, maybe an actually fleshed out evil faction for once. NPCs to actually care about would help a lot. Memorable side quests is definitely pretty important to the Bethesda formula, but these are all things that are unknowns at this point. There's no way to know for sure if any of the quests are going to be good. We'll just have to wait and find out, which gets to the end point, which is, don't fucking pre-order this game or any game. But I guarantee you, especially if this video gets a shit ton of views and dislikes, which I find highly likely, you people are not going to listen. Even if you do want to buy the game, why would you pre-order it? Why would you give them money up front? Bethesda will never learn if you keep buying their shit at launch. They're buggy, unbalanced, shallow, mediocre shit. If you didn't learn from Fallout 4, if you didn't learn from Fallout 76, well, I guess I'm wasting my time. You're probably never going to learn. That's not to say this game will be bad. I don't think so. I chose that title very carefully. A disappointment does not mean bad. If you think it does, well, you're probably a child or have the emotional intelligence of one. I was slightly disappointed with Elden Ring despite my realistic expectations. I still think it's a good game. Hell, it's a great game, but it's not a fucking masterpiece by any stretch. And if you still think Elden Ring is a masterpiece despite all the flaws I pointed out and you actually agree with those flaws, well, Horizon Forbidden West is a fucking masterpiece by your retarded definition. So I hope you can live with that. Okay, so to wrap up this video, I do want to briefly comment on some of the other things in the Summer Games, festivals, showcase, whatever. Honestly, I've been pretty bored throughout most of this thing. I just finished the Capcom showcase at the time of recording this. And yeah, I guess I'll talk about Resident Evil 4 since it's one of my favorite games of all time. Honestly, the original would make my top 5. And yes, someday I will make a list of my favorite games of all time. Just not yet. And I gotta say, I'm not disappointed, but I am annoyed at the new direction that they're taking this game. I understand that they're trying to make the whole Resident Evil brand homogenous. Clearly the Resident Evil 2 style of things, at least that they did with the reimagining, is exactly how they want to take the franchise moving forward. I mean, shit, they're adding a third-person mode to Resident Evil Village. And so they want this sort of action-horror hybrid, which conceptually is completely fine, but like I tried to explain in my Village review and later in Best and Worst Games of 2021, I think Village was an awful mix, and Resident Evil 3 was just a shitty game. So I don't have super high hopes for this. Maybe they'll go back to the drawing board, take more inspirations from Resident Evil 2, and try and preserve as much as possible from Resident Evil 4, but I'm having my doubts. I believe Shinji Mikami himself, even though he doesn't work at Capcom anymore, said that he wants Capcom to make the story of Resident Evil 4 more serious. How do you not fucking understand the appeal of the game you directed? The goofy 80s action movie stuff is one of the best elements of Resident Evil 4. And the fact that it was mostly action with a little bit of horror obviously still pisses off Resident Evil fans to this day. I get it, usually I hate change too, but Resident Evil 4 is fucking amazing. It might not be necessarily a good Resident Evil game, but as a third-person shooter, to this day, it is possibly the best third-person shooter of all time. So my only hopes, really, are that they try to preserve as much of the encounter design at least. You can keep this more horror angle, even though it really just doesn't look like Resident Evil 4. That's fine. They've acknowledged it's a reimagining at least. But if they don't bring back some of those amazing fucking encounters and constant gameplay variety that the original had, then fuck the game, it shouldn't be made. If you're gonna just make a worse version of a game from 15 years ago, go fuck yourself. The only other thing I'm even really interested in that I've seen so far is probably the Callisto Protocol, that is the Dead Space spiritual successor made by former Dead Space developers. So, just consider me cautiously optimistic. Everything I've seen looks pretty good, but at the end of the day, gameplay is king, and we don't really know if the gameplay will be good. There seems to be more melee combat, which could be good, maybe, I don't know. Which, funny enough, if you really want to look at a great game that combined action and horror, the first Dead Space is a perfect example. Capcom really should be looking to the competition for that one. I honestly believe Dead Space handled mixing those genres better than the Resident Evil 2 remake. But whatever, that's a subject for another video or something. I guess if I see anything else that's cool, maybe I'll make another video. All I know is Dragon's Dogma 2 has been teased for weeks, and Capcom still hasn't revealed it. They literally just teased it again in that showcase. So I feel like it is happening, but they really got us by the balls here, man. I want to make that review, but if I just make it out of the blue, I don't think it's going to get many views. You see what happened to my Ratchet & Clank video. But I do want to fucking talk about Dragon's Dogma. I just need an excuse. Oh yeah, and somehow I almost forgot to mention The Last of Us 1 Remake. Less than 10 years after it came out, we're getting possibly the most pointless remake ever made, and in some ways looks worse than the original, at least aesthetically. But really this remake only exists, one, to make more money off of existing assets from Last of Us 2, considering that game was a financial disappointment despite what Sony will tell you. There's a reason they didn't release sales numbers for over a year. But the other reason, and possibly the more important, at least to Neil Druckmann, is to rewrite the original story to make Joel more of a bad guy, because we can't have people relating to a dad character in this day and age. And listen, I just don't have the energy to rant about this right now. When it comes out, I'll give it a look, and hopefully the rest of you have enough self-control to not buy it until somebody gives it a proper review and addresses the story changes that they're obviously going to make. But that's about it, I guess. I'll see you next time, guys.